Are Ona Kakanfo Latusa, known simply as Are Latusa, was the military commander and de facto ruler of Ibadan in the late 19th century. One of the most powerful and most controversial figures in Yoruba history. Born in the small village of Ilora near present-day Oyo, Nigeria. On arrival in Ibadan, Latusa joined Ogunmola's private army and soon became the captain of his guards. Through sheer ambition, battlefield prowess and political cunning, he rose through the ranks, eventually claiming the title of Are Ona Kakanfo, supreme military leader of Yorubaland and de facto ruler of Ibadan. Are Latusa's aggressive expansionist policies and the brutal rule of his appointed ajeles in eastern Yorubaland became direct sparks for the Kiriji War. His relentless push to dominate Ekiti, Ijesha and other towns fueled a wildfire of resentment across the land. For 16 relentless years, the Kiriji War scorched Yorubaland. Battle after battle, the powerful armies of Ibadan clashed with the Eastern Yoruba Confederacy, leaving hundreds of thousands dead in its wake. The Battle of Ikirun, 1878, a decisive Ibadan victory. They shattered the coalition's siege, breaking the enemy lines and leaving massive casualties in their wake. It was a bloody battle. Hundreds of coalition troops drowned in the Otin River trying to escape, giving the battle its name Jalumi, meaning drown in the river. By the late 1870s, Imesi-Ile had become the stronghold of the Ekiti-Parapo and the scene of repeated, brutal battles as the war dragged on. Each clash thundered through the hills, shaking the earth with the ferocity of desperate men fighting for survival. The battles at Igbajo and Iloro turned these border towns into fiery flashpoints between Ibadan and Ekiti forces. Gunfire and cannon blasts tore through the streets as each side fought with a fury that shook the very soil beneath them. Clashes here were frequent as both sides struggled for control of trade and movement corridors. The Battle of Otun Ekiti saw Ibadan forces launching relentless assaults against the town, a proud member of the Parapo alliance. The fighting was savage, wave after wave of bloodshed, destruction of properties, leaving heavy losses on both sides and the fields soaked in sorrow. The Battle of Okemesi saw the Parapo alliance fiercely defend the city, sacred as the birthplace of the Kiriji War. Every street, every hill became a battlefield as warriors fought with the fury of those defending the very soul of their cause. Skirmishes around Okemesi continued throughout the war, especially during the early phase of the resistance. Fierce battles erupted near Oke-Emezi and Ipoti, critical lifelines for the Parapo alliance. Determined to strangle enemy supplies, Ibadan forces launched relentless assaults, turning roads and forests into killing fields. In war, cutting off an enemy's supplies is often deadlier than winning a battlefield. It starves resistance at its roots. Conflict raged at Betrayal and Ibadan, smaller towns caught in the jaws of war, as both armies fought fiercely to secure territory and fortify their positions. Every captured foothold meant survival. Every loss pushed aside closer to collapse. These battles saw brutal trench warfare, guerrilla tactics, and the deadly roar of imported firearms and cannons, making the Kiriji War not just the longest, but also one of the most technologically advanced indigenous wars in Yoruba history. As the Kiriji War dragged on, Ibadan's once iron grip began to falter. Behind the walls of power, cracks were spreading, slow, silent, but unstoppable. At the heart of it all stood Are Ona Kakanfo Latusa, Ibadan's supreme commander, feared ruler, and a man slowly being devoured by the very power he wielded. Latusa had built his empire on discipline, conquest and fear. But fear, once sown, grows wild. Suspicion crept into his ranks. His own lieutenants, once loyal, grew restless under his iron rule. The war still raged outside, but inside Ibadan, a new storm was gathering. According to legend, what happened next marked the beginning of the end for Ibadan's dominance. It all came to a head in 1885. The once unshakable Are Latusa stood on the edge of a storm he could no longer command. A fierce disagreement with his trusted commander, Balogun Ozungbekun, sparked by a dispute over a single slave, trivial to some but deeply symbolic, was more than a mere quarrel. It was a crack in the foundation of his power. Whispers echoed through the palace halls. Loyalty wavered. The eyes of his warriors no longer held the same fire of obedience. The long, dragging war had drained them all, but it had emptied Latusa most of all. Faced with the unbearable weight of dwindling support and the possibility of being undone by betrayal or rebellion, he made a final, irreversible choice. In solitude, proud and unyielding even in despair, Are Latusa took his own life. The mighty warlord fell, not by the blade of an enemy, but by the silence of his own heart. Thus ended the reign of a man who once held Ibadan in the palm of his hand. His death marked more than the fall of a man. It signaled the beginning of the end for Ibadan's dominance. The warlord who had once boasted of crushing the Ekitis in 3 days was no more. In his absence, Ibadan's morale crumbled into dust. Still the war raged, but the cost was everywhere. Soldiers staggered with exhaustion, ammunition dwindled, and across Yorubaland, towns lay in ruins, families fled, and trade withered into dust. Over 200,000 men had marched to war. Thousands lay dead. Once thriving Yoruba towns became ghost villages. Ibadan stood weakened, Ekiti-Parapo still defiant. The war, drained of blood and purpose, staggered toward an uneasy peace. In the end, the Yoruba civil war had no victor, only survivors. In distant Lagos, British merchants grew restless. The fires of Yorubaland's war threatened to scorch their dreams of trade and control. Commerce lay in ruins. The cocoa roots, once thriving, were broken. With profits bleeding away, diplomacy became a race against time. But by then, Ibadan and all of Yorubaland had fallen under a new shadow, the British protectorate. Just like the African proverb goes, when brothers fight to the death, it is the stranger who inherits their father's estate. On September 23, 1886, at Imesi-Ile, a peace treaty was signed. The Ekitis were declared free, their long struggle finally honored in ink and history. Though the war officially ended in 1886, the last warriors didn't lay down their arms until 1893, when Governor G.T. Carter visited both camps and ordered final disarmament. In the end, it wasn't gunfire that ended the Kiriji War. It was fatigue and the fragile thread of diplomacy. The Ekiti spirit endured and triumphed. Ekiti-Parapo was no longer just a name. It became a living memory, a symbol of unity, resilience, and the unbreakable will to resist. They were not the largest, they were not the strongest, but they were the most determined, and in the end, that made all the difference. The Ekiti spirit cherishes liberty above all, and when faced with chains, they chose death over a life without freedom. Fabunmi of Okemezi, Ogedengbe of Ilesa, the kings, the witch doctors, the Iyayus, they stood for liberty, for land, for dignity. The Kiriji War was more than a conflict. It was a declaration that no empire, no matter how mighty, can crush a people united by purpose.